My name is Margot. I am 30 years old, and I have spent the better part of my life trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided I was invisible. The very first thing my older sister, Sabrina, said to me when I reached across the pristine white linen tablecloth for a small cardboard box to pack up my unfinished Wagyu steak was a sentence that would finally and permanently break our family apart. "Don't box the leftovers. You didn't pay a single dollar for this." She did not whisper it. She did not lean in and say it under her breath to spare my feelings or keep the peace. Sabrina said it loudly, her voice cutting sharply through the elegant jazz music playing softly from the concealed speakers in the private dining room. She tapped her manicured thumb hard against the polished oak table for emphasis, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel. Every single person at my mother's 60th birthday party heard her. The clinking of crystal wine glasses stopped instantly. Silver forks hovered halfway to people's mouths. The lively, buzzing conversation about summer vacations in Europe and rising real estate markets died on their lips, replaced by a suffocating, heavy silence. I sat there, my hand still reaching out, frozen in midair. I could feel the sudden, intense heat rising in my cheeks, the familiar, sickening wave of being publicly humiliated washing over me. It was a physical sensation, a tight burning in my chest that made it hard to draw a full breath. I looked at my mother, Nadine. For a split second, I foolishly hoped she would intervene. I hoped she would finally act like a mother to both of her daughters. I hoped she would look at Sabrina and tell her that she was being out of line, cruel, and incredibly rude to her younger sister. Instead, my mother took a slow, deliberate sip of her expensive vintage red wine. She lowered the glass, leaving a faint smudge of lipstick on the rim, and smiled. It was a soft, indulgent smile directed entirely at Sabrina. "Real family comes first," my mother said gently, her voice dripping with that toxic sweetness she reserved specifically for covering up my sister's bad behavior. "Who pays doesn't matter, darling. We are just happy everyone is here to celebrate and be together." Her words were meant to sound peaceful to the extended relatives, but to me, they were a death sentence. In one sentence, my mother had validated Sabrina's insult. She had officially branded me the freeloader of the family, the ungrateful, struggling youngest daughter who showed up empty-handed to eat expensive food on her wealthy older sister's dime. I looked down at the beautiful, rich cut of meat on my plate. I had barely eaten 2 bites. Then I looked up at the faces of my aunts, uncles, and cousins sitting around the long table. They were all watching me. They were waiting to see how I would absorb the blow. They expected me to shrink. They expected me to apologize in a quiet, trembling voice, to pull my hand back, and to sit in quiet shame for the rest of the evening. That was my assigned role in this family drama. I was the scapegoat. I was the punching bag. I was the one who was supposed to swallow my pride so that everyone else could enjoy their dessert. But not tonight. For years, I had kept my mouth shut. I had paid for things in secret, forgiven unforgivable insults, and swallowed my pride to keep a peace that only benefited them. That night, sitting in that freezing dining room under the glow of a crystal chandelier, I realized that my silence was not buying peace. It was just buying them more ammunition to destroy me. I slowly pulled my hand back from the takeout box. I did not shake. I did not cry. I picked up my heavy linen napkin, folded it with terrifying precision into a perfect square, and placed it neatly next to my empty plate. "You're right," I said quietly. My voice was steady. It was so calm that it sounded like it belonged to someone else. Sabrina blinked. Her smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She had braced herself for an argument, a tearful exit, a raised voice, something she could use to point her finger and call me dramatic. My calm agreement completely threw her off balance. I stood up, pushing my heavy oak chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I reached for my red winter coat draped over the back of the seat and slipped it on. The silk lining felt cool against my burning skin. I did not look at my mother. I did not look at my father, who was suddenly very interested in reading the microscopic text on the label of a sparkling water bottle. I just turned around and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the private room. Before I tell you what happened after the doors closed behind me, And before I describe the absolute horror that drained the color from my sister's face when the restaurant manager walked in, I need to know something. What time is it where you are right now? Where are you watching this video from, and what is the weather like there today? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Because what my family did not know as they watched me walk out in that red coat was that a $14,200 bill was currently being printed at the front desk. And every single cent of it was tied to my name. To understand why I walked out instead of screaming at them, you have to understand the heavy history I was carrying on my shoulders. Walking away was not a sudden surrender. It was the absolute limit of my endurance. It was the result of a lifetime of being erased. If my family's treatment of me was a museum, there would be countless exhibits of pain, dismissal, and blatant favoritism. Let me walk you through just a few of them so you can see the foundation this disaster was built upon. Exhibit A took place on the day of my college graduation. I had worked 2 grueling part-time jobs, survived on instant ramen and black coffee, and studied until my eyes bled to graduate with honors in landscape architecture. I had paid for every single credit hour myself. On the morning of the ceremony, Sabrina called me. She sounded breathless and annoyed. She said she could not make it. She claimed she had a massive, career-defining interior design project to finish and simply could not get away. I was hurt, but I accepted it. The real sting came 3 hours later. While I was standing on the lawn in my cap and gown, sweating in the summer sun, my phone buzzed. It was a social media notification. Sabrina had posted a long, glowing tribute to me. "So incredibly proud of my little sister today," she wrote, attaching a photo of us from 3 years prior. It took a lot of sacrifices, and helping fund her tuition was the hardest, but most rewarding thing I have ever done. I always knew my financial support would push her to the finish line. Go conquer the world, Margot. She had not given me a single dime. Not for books, not for tuition, not even for a cup of coffee. But the comments flooded in, praising Sabrina for being the best, most generous big sister in the world. My parents liked the post. My aunts commented with heart emojis. When I brought it up to my mother later, asking why Sabrina would lie so blatantly about something so important, my mother sighed heavily, looking at me like I was a stubborn child. "Margot, she is just trying to feel involved. She is proud of you. Why do you always have to make everything a conflict? Just let her have this little moment." Exhibit B was my 25th birthday. I had planned a small, intimate dinner at a local Italian place. I sat at a table for 4, watching the ice melt in my water glass for an hour and a half. The waiters kept giving me pitying looks. My parents never showed up. When I finally called them, my father answered, sounding utterly exhausted. Sabrina had broken her apartment lease to move in with a guy she had known for exactly 3 weeks, leaving behind a massive fine and a trashed living room. My parents had spent my entire birthday cleaning her mess, scrubbing floors, and negotiating with her angry landlord so she would not get sued for damages. "We are so sorry, sweetie," my mother had said over the phone, taking the receiver from my father. She did not sound sorry. She sounded annoyed that I was interrupting her crisis management. "Sabrina is in a terrible state right now. You are strong, Margot. You can handle a quiet birthday by yourself. She needs us right now. You understand, don't you?" That was the recurring theme of my entire life. I was strong, therefore I required no care, no attention, and no celebration. Sabrina was a mess, therefore she required all of it. Exhibit C was the ultimate contrast that finally opened my eyes to the reality of my family dynamic. 3 years ago, I won a highly prestigious city award for a public park landscape design. I had poured my soul into the blueprints, working nights and weekends for 8 months to create something beautiful, sustainable, and accessible. When I brought the heavy glass trophy home to show my parents, glowing with pride, my mother barely looked up from her magazine. "That is nice, Margot. You got very lucky with that judging panel," she said dismissively, turning a page. Not even 10 minutes later, Sabrina walked through the front door holding a cheap, plastic vase filled with fake, dusty silk flowers she had bought on clearance at a local craft store. She placed it on the dining table, adjusting a plastic leaf, and stepped back, posing as if she had just painted a masterpiece. My mother gasped, dropping her magazine completely. "Oh, Sabrina. That is breathtaking," my mother gushed, walking over to inspect the cheap plastic stems with genuine awe. "You really have a natural eye for design. It is a true gift. You are so talented, it just comes effortlessly to you." I stood there holding my heavy glass trophy, feeling entirely invisible. I was the scapegoat, the invisible workhorse whose achievements were either ignored entirely or attributed to blind luck. Sabrina was the golden child, the fragile genius whose bare minimum effort was treated like a miracle from above. Her interior design business was actually struggling, mostly because she refused to listen to clients and overcharged for basic mood boards, but in our family, she was treated like a visionary celebrity. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their respect through hard work and silent generosity. I thought if I just did enough, paid for enough, achieved enough, they would eventually look at me the way they looked at her. I was wrong. Generosity does not cure a toxic family dynamic. It only funds it. For weeks before the disastrous dinner, my mother called me on a Tuesday evening. She sounded unusually subdued, almost vulnerable. Her 60th birthday was approaching, and she mentioned, almost shyly, that she really just wanted a nice, elegant dinner surrounded by family. No massive, chaotic parties, no loud music. Just excellent food, a beautiful setting, and the people she loved most in the world. In a moment of profound weakness and foolish daughterly hope, I decided I was going to give her exactly what she wanted. I had just landed a massive commercial landscaping contract for a sprawling tech campus, and my firm was finally highly profitable. I had money in the bank, and I wanted to treat her. I wanted to see her face light up. I spent 4 solid days researching the perfect venue. I settled on the Oceanic, a breathtaking, high-end seafood and steak restaurant located on the top floor of a downtown high-rise. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city skyline, private dining rooms with heavy velvet curtains, and a menu that made my mouth water just reading it. I set up a meeting with the events manager, a sharp, professional man named Declan. We sat in a curved leather booth, reviewing the options for hours. I wanted this to be absolutely flawless. I selected a beautiful 4-course menu featuring lobster bisque and Wagyu beef, ordered a customized blue and silver cake because those were my mother's absolute favorite colors, and arranged for a private string quartet to play softly in the background. Declan ran the numbers on his tablet. For 20 guests, including the private room fee, the custom floral arrangements, the 4-course menu, and the mandatory gratuity, the estimate is roughly $9,500, he said, tapping his screen. I did not flinch. I reached into my purse and handed him my platinum credit card. I signed a heavy paper contract and paid a $2,500 non-refundable deposit right then and there to secure the room. I also signed an authorization form allowing the restaurant to automatically charge the remaining balance to my card on the night of the event, after the final drink orders were tallied. I wanted it to be a complete surprise. I wanted my mother to walk in, see the beautiful room, taste the incredible food, and know that her youngest daughter loved her enough to make it happen without asking for anything in return. The only person in the family I told was Sabrina. I had to, because I needed her to help coordinate getting our parents to the restaurant on time without ruining the surprise. I sent her a brief text, booked the Oceanic for Mom's 60th on the 18th. Private room, all expenses handled by me. Just make sure Mom and Dad are dressed nicely and arrive by 7. Don't tell them where we are going. Sabrina replied 3 hours later with a simple thumbs-up emoji. I should have known that a thumbs-up from my sister was actually a declaration of war. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a notification from a new family group chat. I was not included in it, but my cousin Wyatt, who was always a bit of a gossip and loved drama, had sent me a screenshot. The chat was named Mom's Fabulous 60th, created by Sabrina. Her opening message read, "Hey family. I am so incredibly excited to announce that I am hosting Mom's 60th birthday dinner at the Oceanic. It took a lot of strings to pull this off, and my budget is crying, but our mother deserves the absolute best. I am handling the vision, the venue, and the menu. Please let me know any dietary restrictions ASAP so I can coordinate with my event team. I stared at the screenshot, my blood running completely cold. She was doing it again. She was taking my hard work, my money, and wearing it like a crown. I was about to call her and demand she correct the message when an automated email popped into my inbox. It was from the Oceanics event portal. The subject line read, "Update to event contact information." I clicked it open, my hands physically shaking. The primary contact name for the event had been changed from Margot to Sabrina. I immediately called Declan. He answered on the second ring, sounding slightly stressed. "Margot, hi. I was just about to call you. Your sister Sabrina called us this morning. She said she was the co-host and that you were incredibly busy with your architecture firm, so she would be taking over the creative direction and communication for the dinner to take the load off your shoulders. Did she ask to change the payment method?" I asked, my voice tight and strained. Declan paused. "No. She specifically stated that the payment authorization on file was to remain the same. She just wanted to control the menu, the decor, and the guest list." Sabrina had hijacked my gift. She wanted the glory of being the generous, wealthy, successful host, but she fully intended to let my credit card bleed for it. I sat in my quiet office, staring blindly at the green blueprints spread across my desk, feeling a familiar, heavy exhaustion settling deep into my bones. I could have canceled the whole thing right then. I could have called Declan, revoked my card, and let Sabrina explain to the entire family why the fabulous luxury dinner she promised was suddenly non-existent. But I pictured my mother. I pictured her excitement about turning 60. If I canceled, Sabrina would spin it to make me look like a jealous, bitter monster who ruined our mother's milestone birthday purely out of spite. So, I made a choice. I decided to keep the peace. I told Declan to leave her as the contact, but flagged my file that no major financial changes or upgrades could be made without my explicit verbal approval. It was a terrible decision. Keeping the peace with a toxic person is just another way of going to war with yourself. Giving Sabrina an inch meant she immediately took 100 miles. Over the next 3 weeks, my phone rang constantly with panicked calls from Declan. Sabrina, drunk on the imaginary power of spending someone else's money, began demanding absurd, theatrical upgrades to the already luxurious menu. "Margot," Declan said one afternoon, sounding completely exhausted. "Sabrina just emailed requesting we swap the house wine selection for a vintage Bordeaux pairing for all 20 guests. It will add roughly $3,000 to the final bill. Do you approve?" "No," I said firmly, rubbing the bridge of my nose. "Stick to the original wine package. Do not upgrade." 2 days later, Declan called again. She wants a custom ice sculpture of a swan and a 3-tiered imported seafood tower for the cocktail hour. That is another $2,000. "Absolutely not. Deny the request," I replied. Sabrina was trying to turn a classy, intimate family dinner into a grotesque display of wealth. But as the days passed, I realized it was not just about the food. I started noticing a bizarre pattern in the guest list she was submitting to Declan. She had invited Aunt Hazel, which was normal, but she also added 4 of Aunt Hazel's wealthiest friends, people my mother barely knew and certainly did not care about. She also added her own best friend, Meredith, a woman who always looked at me like I was something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. It did not take a genius to figure out her motive. Sabrina's freelance interior design business was drowning. She was currently facing a massive lawsuit from a former client for failing to deliver custom furniture she had already charged them for. She was desperate for cash and prestige. She needed this dinner to act as a high-end networking event. She was using my money to throw a lavish party, hoping to impress Aunt Hazel's rich friends and secure new design contracts to save her failing reputation. Because I kept privately denying her ridiculous upgrades, Sabrina realized she could not inflate the restaurant bill as much as she wanted. So, she took a different route. She began weaponizing the family against me. A week before the dinner, I received a text from Aunt Hazel. "Margot, honey, I am a little disappointed. Sabrina is working her fingers to the bone planning this incredible $15,000 dinner for your mother, and she tells me you haven't offered to help her at all. You have a successful firm now. Don't be stingy with your own sister when she is carrying such a heavy financial burden for our family. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. $15,000? She was lying about the cost to make herself look even more like a financial martyr. Before I could even formulate a polite response to Aunt Hazel, my phone chimed again. It was a direct message on social media from Meredith, Sabrina's snarky sidekick. Hey Margot. Sabrina is super stressed about paying for the Oceanic. It is pretty messed up that you are just sitting back letting her drain her savings while you play the wealthy architect. Step up and help your sister. I was being painted as the cheap, ungrateful villain in a story where I was the only one actually opening my wallet. They were the flying monkeys, the loyal followers manipulated by the toxic person to do their dirty work and apply emotional pressure. I drafted a dozen angry replies. I wanted to screenshot the $2,500 deposit receipt and blast it to everyone. I wanted to expose her failing business and her lies. But every time I typed out the truth, my hands hovered over the send button, and I deleted it. I was trapped in the old family dynamic. If I caused a scene now, I would be accused of ruining the mood leading up to the birthday. I would be told I was acting jealous of Sabrina's hard work. So, I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth. I ignored Meredith's message completely. I replied to Aunt Hazel with a polite, I am contributing in my own way, Aunt Hazel. See you at the dinner. I thought I could just survive the night. I thought if I just showed up, ate my steak, and let my mother have a nice time, the nightmare would end and I could go back to my quiet life. I did not realize that Sabrina had one final, brutal plan to erase me entirely from my own gift. The night of the dinner finally arrived. I left my apartment early, needing a few minutes of quiet time to center myself before facing the firing squad of my family. I wore a beautifully tailored red dress and a matching red wool coat. It was a bold color, something I usually avoided to keep from drawing Sabrina's inevitable criticism, but tonight, I wanted to feel strong. I wanted armor. I arrived at the Oceanic 45 minutes before the guests were scheduled to appear. The private room was even more breathtaking than I remembered. Soft amber light reflected off the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the glittering city streets below. The long oak table was set meticulously with heavy silver cutlery, folded linen napkins, and crystal glasses that caught the light. The blue and silver cake sat beautifully on a display table in the corner. Declan spotted me and walked over, looking relieved. He held a black leather folio tightly against his chest. Margot, everything is set. Despite the creative friction over the last few weeks, the original menu is locked in, he said, offering a sympathetic, knowing smile. He opened the folio to show me the final printed estimate. With the private room fee, the 4-course meal for 20 people, city taxes, and the mandatory 20% gratuity for large parties, the total was exactly $14,200. Since I had already paid the $2,500 deposit, the remaining balance to be charged to my card tonight would be $11,700. I have your platinum card on file, Declan confirmed, showing me the last 4 digits. I will run the final authorization now, and the charge will officially process after dessert is served. You will not even have to look at a bill during the party. Everything will be seamless. I signed the authorization slip with a heavy pen. Thank you, Declan. Please, whatever happens tonight, do not announce that I paid. I do not want this to become a debate or a screaming match. Just let it be about my mother. He nodded respectfully and walked away. I stood near the windows, taking a deep breath, watching the traffic far below. 20 minutes later, the heavy oak doors flew open. Sabrina arrived. She did not just walk into the room, she made an entrance. She was wearing a sparkling, floor-length white cocktail dress that looked more appropriate for a bridal shower than a mother's 60th birthday dinner. Meredith flanked her left side, carrying Sabrina's designer handbag like a loyal servant. Sabrina immediately began barking loud orders at a young man holding a professional camera, a photographer she had hired without my knowledge or approval. Make sure you get the lighting right near the cake, Sabrina ordered, pointing a manicured finger at the corner. And I want candids of me greeting the guests as they come in. Make sure my good side is facing the window. I watched silently from the corner as my relatives began to filter in. Aunt Hazel rushed over to hug Sabrina, loudly praising the expensive venue. My parents arrived shortly after. My mother looked beautiful in a navy blue dress, but her eyes immediately locked onto Sabrina. They embraced dramatically while the photographer's flash went off like a strobe light. I walked over and gave my mother a hug, wishing her a happy birthday. She smiled warmly, patted my arm dismissively, and quickly turned back to ask Sabrina about the floral centerpieces. Feeling suffocated and invisible, I walked over to the photographer's gear bag resting on a side table to grab a glass of water. Poking out of the front pocket of his bag was a printed piece of paper titled Sabrina's Shot List. I could not help myself. I looked down at it. There were bullet points detailing specific moments to capture: Sabrina toasting, Sabrina hugging mom, Sabrina looking emotional during the speeches. But at the very bottom, in bold, italicized font, was a note that made my stomach drop into my shoes. Note for photographer: please focus all family group shots on Sabrina and Nadine, birthday mom. Margot, sister in red, hates photos and is very awkward on camera. Keep her out of the main frames, place her on the far edges if necessary. Limit her solo shots entirely. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. She wasn't just stealing the credit. She was actively paying a professional to visually erase me from the memory of the night. I dropped the paper and walked toward the long dining table to find my seat. The heavy cardstock place cards were arranged meticulously in elegant calligraphy. I walked toward the head of the table, near where my parents were seated, expecting to find my name. It was not there. Sabrina's name was directly to my mother's right. Meredith was on Sabrina's right. Aunt Hazel was across from them. I kept walking down the length of the table. I finally found my name card. It was placed at the very end of the table, on the sharp corner, directly next to the swinging kitchen doors where the waitstaff would be rushing in and out all night with heavy trays. I was seated next to a second cousin I had not spoken to in 10 years, as far away from the birthday celebration as physically possible. I stood staring at my name printed on the card. A waiter bumped my shoulder hard as he rushed out of the kitchen with a tray of ice water. "Excuse me, miss," he muttered quickly. I looked up and saw Sabrina watching me from the head of the table. She had a glass of expensive champagne in her hand and a cruel smirk on her face. She raised her glass slightly, a silent, mocking challenge. She wanted me to throw a fit. She wanted me to complain loudly about my seat so she could sigh heavily, roll her eyes, and tell everyone I was ruining the evening. I did not give her the satisfaction. I pulled out the chair by the kitchen doors and sat down in the shadows. The dinner was an absolute masterclass in psychological torture. Course after course was brought out by the impeccable staff. The food was phenomenal: rich, creamy lobster bisque, perfectly seared scallops with lemon butter, and a vintage wine that I had carefully selected to pair with the flavors. But I could barely taste any of it. It tasted like ash in my mouth. From my distant corner by the noisy kitchen doors, I watched Sabrina hold court. She was glowing under the attention. Every time a relative complimented the food, the service, or the stunning view, Sabrina would laugh modestly, touch her collarbone, and say, "Oh, I am just so glad you like it." It was a complete nightmare to organize, and my credit card is definitely crying, but Mom is worth every single penny. Meredith chimed in constantly, acting as her paid hype woman. Sabrina literally did not sleep for a week putting this together. You guys have no idea how much stress she has been under. This place is insanely expensive. My mother was practically vibrating with pride. During the main course, she tapped her wine glass with a silver spoon to make a toast. She stood up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I just want to say how incredibly blessed I am," my mother said, her voice shaking with genuine emotion. "Looking around this room, seeing this beautiful setup, I know how hard my eldest daughter worked to make this happen." She reached out and squeezed Sabrina's hand tightly. "Sabrina, you have such a generous, beautiful heart. You have always been the glue holding us together. Thank you for this incredible gift." Everyone clapped enthusiastically. The photographer snapped a dozen rapid-fire pictures of Sabrina wiping a fake tear from her eye. My father, Wallace, sat quietly next to my mother. He caught my eye for a brief second from down the long table. He knew I had the money. He knew Sabrina's business was failing and she was facing a lawsuit. Deep down, he had to suspect something was horribly wrong with this narrative. But he quickly looked away, staring intensely down at his plate. His silence was a decision. It was easier to let me be erased than to confront the hurricane that was my sister. I felt completely hollow. The steak on my plate, a gorgeous, thick cut of Wagyu beef, had gone cold. I had barely eaten 2 bites. My stomach was tied in tight knots. I was paying $14,200 to sit by a kitchen door, getting bumped by waiters, and watch my sister be canonized as a saint. As the waiters began clearing the main course plates to prepare for the cake, I realized I could not bear to throw the expensive food away. It was a small, petty comfort, but I wanted to at least take my steak home to my dog. I reached across the table toward a stack of small, elegant cardboard takeout boxes the waiters had left near the center for leftovers. That was when she said it. "Don't box the leftovers. You didn't pay a single dollar for this." The words echoed in the sudden silence of the room. The cruelty in Sabrina's voice was so sharp, so casually vicious, that it took my breath away. I looked at my mother, waiting for the defense that would never come. "Real family comes first," my mother smiled, sipping her wine. "Who pays doesn't matter." In that exact moment, the final, fraying thread holding me to my family snapped. It did not break with a loud bang or a dramatic scream. It dissolved quietly, like sugar in boiling water. I realized that my mother did not love me the way she loved Sabrina. She loved what I could provide, 0 conflict and a quiet, background existence. My father loved his own comfort more than he loved protecting me. And Sabrina did not just want to be the center of attention, she wanted me to be actively humiliated. If proof was the only language they respected, why was I still volunteering to pay for people who had already decided I was worthless? I pulled my hand away from the takeout box. I picked up my napkin and placed it neatly on the table. "You're right," I said quietly, looking directly into Sabrina's eyes. The smirk on her face faltered for a fraction of a second. "I shouldn't take what I didn't contribute to." My mother let out a small, relieved sigh, thinking I had backed down and accepted my place. I stood up. I put on my red coat, the silk sliding smoothly over my shoulders. Sabrina frowned, suddenly unsure. "Don't be dramatic, Margot. Sit down." "I am not being dramatic," I replied, my voice steady and completely void of emotion. "I am just correcting the arrangement." I turned my back on the table and walked toward the heavy oak doors. I pushed them open and stepped out into the quiet, carpeted hallway. As I walked away, I listened closely. I waited for the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. I waited for my father to call my name, or for my mother to come rushing out to ask where I was going. I heard nothing. Not a single person followed me. That silence hurt more than the insult. But as I walked down the hall toward the front reception desk, the pain began to fade, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They had made their choice. Now, I was going to make mine. If you are enjoying this story and want to see the absolute chaos that unfolds next, please drop a comment saying, "I'm Win." That is the secret code for everyone who has made it this far into the drama, and I will be hearting and replying to every single comment with that keyword. Don't forget to like and subscribe to catch the explosive conclusion. The hallway outside the private dining room was incredibly quiet, a stark contrast to the buzzing tension I had just left behind. I walked slowly, my heels sinking slightly into the thick, plush carpet. With every step I took away from those heavy oak doors, a strange, unfamiliar feeling began to wash over me. It was not panic. It was not regret. It was an overwhelming sense of lightness. For 30 years, I had carried the immense weight of their expectations, their unspoken rules, and their endless demands for my silent compliance. Taking off that weight felt like breathing real air for the very first time. I reached the front reception area of the Oceanic. The lobby was softly lit, smelling of expensive lilies and polished wood. Declan, the events manager, was standing behind the mahogany desk, reviewing a stack of receipts on his tablet. When he looked up and saw me standing there alone in my red coat, His professional smile faded into a look of genuine concern. He stepped out from behind the desk, his brow furrowed. "Margot? Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice low. The main course was just cleared. "The cake presentation is not scheduled for another 20 minutes. Do you need me to adjust the timeline?" I shook my head. I walked up to the edge of the desk, placing my hands flat on the cool mahogany surface to steady myself. "Declan, I need you to pull up the file for the birthday dinner." He nodded, tapping his screen quickly. "Of course. I have it right here. What do you need?" "I need you to remove my platinum credit card from the file," I said. My voice was calm, but the finality in it made Declan freeze. "I am canceling my payment authorization for the remaining balance. Right now." Declan stared at me, his eyes widening slightly. In his line of work, he had probably seen every type of family drama imaginable, but this was clearly unexpected. He cleared his throat, trying to maintain his professional composure. "Margot, I need to remind you of the contract terms," he said gently, turning the tablet slightly so I could see the screen. "You already paid the $2,500 room deposit. As per our agreement, that amount is entirely non-refundable. If you remove your card from the final authorization now, the remaining balance of $11,700 will become due immediately upon the conclusion of the event. The party inside will be fully responsible for settling it before they leave." "I understand," I replied without hesitation. "Keep the deposit. Consider it the price of my education. I just paid $2,500 to finally learn that I cannot buy my family's respect. It is a bargain, honestly. Take my card off the file." Declan studied my face for a long moment. He did not ask any intrusive questions. He did not try to talk me out of it or urge me to go back inside and talk it over. He simply saw a woman who had reached her breaking point and decided to help her cross the finish line. He tapped the screen 3 times, swiped to the right, and looked back up at me. "The authorization has been successfully removed," he confirmed quietly. "The system is now generating a live bill for the outstanding balance. Would you like me to go in there and inform them that there has been a payment issue? I can handle it discreetly." "No," I said, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. "Do not be discreet. I want you to print the final bill. Put it in one of your black leather folios. Walk into that room, walk straight up to my sister Sabrina at the head of the table, and place it right next to her wine glass." Declan raised an eyebrow, sensing the gravity of the instructions. "And what would you like me to say to her?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I want you to tell them the exact truth. I want you to say, word for word, 'The woman in the red coat canceled the tab and asked me to hand this to you.'" A faint, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of Declan's mouth. He understood exactly what was happening. He had dealt with Sabrina's arrogant phone calls and ridiculous demands for 3 weeks. He knew she was playing the role of the wealthy host on my dime. "I will deliver the message exactly as requested," Declan said, his tone shifting from customer service manager to willing accomplice. He turned to the receipt printer behind the desk. The machine whirred to life, spitting out a long, detailed piece of paper that documented every single expensive choice Sabrina had made. He folded it neatly, placed it inside the heavy leather folio, and smoothed his suit jacket. "Take your time," I told him. "I am going to wait right over there." I walked over to the large glass partition that separated the lobby from the hallway leading to the private dining rooms. From this vantage point, I could see straight through the small glass window set into the heavy oak doors of our room. I could see the entire table. I could see my mother laughing. I could see Aunt Hazel leaning in to gossip. And I could see Sabrina, sitting like a queen on a throne she did not own, holding her champagne glass, entirely unaware that the kingdom she had built on my silence was about to burn to the ground. I stood in the shadows of the lobby, my heart pounding a steady, rhythmic drumbeat against my ribs. Through the narrow glass panel of the oak doors, the scene inside looked like a silent movie. The lighting was warm and golden. Everyone looked so happy, so deeply invested in the beautiful illusion my sister had created for them. Then, the oak doors swung open. Declan walked into the room. He moved with the crisp, undeniable authority of a man who held the power to end the party. The jazz music seemed to fade into the background as he approached the head of the table. I watched my mother look up, a polite, expectant smile on her face, probably assuming he was coming over to ask if they were ready for the birthday cake presentation. Instead, Declan stopped right next to Sabrina. He did not lean down to whisper. He stood tall, holding the black leather folio in his right hand. I could not hear his voice through the thick glass, but I could read his lips, and I knew exactly what he was saying to the silent room. The woman in the red coat canceled the tab and asked me to hand this to you. He placed the folio deliberately onto the white tablecloth, right beside Sabrina's crystal champagne flute. The physical transformation in my sister was instantaneous and spectacular. The smug, radiant smile vanished from her face so fast it looked as if she had been slapped. Her jaw slackened. Her posture, previously so upright and arrogant, crumbled. She stared at the black folder as if it were a venomous snake that had just uncoiled on her plate. My mother leaned toward her, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. Aunt Hazel stopped mid-sentence. The entire table froze, their eyes darting from Declan to Sabrina to the black folder. Sabrina reached out with a trembling hand and flipped the folio open. She scanned the bottom line. Even from 50 feet away, I saw the exact moment the blood drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking like a pale ghost in a white dress. $11,700. It was a number she could not charm her way out of. Suddenly, my father pushed his heavy chair back. It scraped loudly against the floor. He stood up, his face flushed with panic, and practically ran toward the oak doors. He burst out into the hallway and spotted me standing near the glass partition. He marched over, his breathing heavy, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anger. "Margot, what did you do?" he demanded, his voice a harsh, frantic whisper. I looked at him. I really looked at him. In that moment, I realized everything I needed to know about my father. He did not ask what Sabrina had said to make me leave. He did not ask why I was standing alone in the hallway. His first and only instinct was to accuse me of disrupting the peace. I stopped paying for a dinner that I was explicitly told I did not contribute to, I said, my voice ice cold. Sabrina said I did not pay a single dollar. So, I made her statement true. "This is your mother's 60th birthday," he hissed, gesturing wildly toward the doors. "You cannot just abandon us with a bill like that. You know Sabrina does not have that kind of money right now. You are humiliating her in front of everyone." "She was very comfortable humiliating me in front of everyone," I replied, refusing to break eye contact. "It was my gift to Mom." Sabrina rejected my gift, claimed it as her own, and then told me I was not allowed to eat the food. I am simply respecting her authority as the host. If she is the host, she can pay the bill. Before my father could formulate another excuse for his favorite daughter, the doors opened again. Declan stepped out, holding the folio. He looked at my father, then at me. "Sir, the party needs to settle the balance before anyone leaves the premises," Declan said politely but firmly. My father groaned, rubbing his face with both hands, and trudged back into the room. I followed him, standing just inside the doorway to watch the execution. Sabrina was panicking. Meredith was whispering frantically in her ear. Sabrina reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a gold credit card with shaking fingers. She handed it to Declan, refusing to look at anyone at the table. She was trying desperately to regain control, to act as if this was just a minor inconvenience she could easily brush off. "Just run it," Sabrina snapped at Declan, trying to sound haughty. "Let's get this over with so we can cut the cake." Declan pulled a mobile payment terminal from his apron. He inserted the gold card. The machine thought for a few seconds. Beep. Declined. The sound was incredibly loud in the dead silent room. Sabrina's breath hitched. "Run it again." "The machine is glitching." Declan ran it again. Beep. Declined. Sabrina's face turned a violent shade of red. She dug frantically into her wallet, tossing loyalty cards and receipts onto the table until she found a second credit card. She shoved it toward Declan. "Try this one. My bank is probably just flagging it for a large purchase." Declan inserted the second card. We all waited. The tension in the room was so thick you could choke on it. Beep. Declined. Nobody said a word. Nobody laughed. The silence was profoundly worse than any insult. It was the sound of an illusion shattering into a million pieces. The successful, wealthy, generous daughter was being exposed as a fraud who could not even buy a glass of water on credit. My mother looked devastated. She looked back and forth between Sabrina and the declined cards on the table, the reality of the situation finally piercing through her thick wall of denial. For the first time in 30 years, she did not rush in to protect Sabrina. She just sat there, staring at the daughter she had worshipped, realizing that the entire evening was built on a massive, humiliating lie. The atmosphere in the private dining room had descended into total chaos. Sabrina was practically hyperventilating, staring at the two useless plastic cards resting on the white tablecloth. Meredith had scooted her chair slightly away, suddenly eager to distance herself from the sinking ship. My father was pacing near the windows, massaging his temples. Then, a voice cut through the heavy, suffocating panic. It was a voice that rarely spoke at family gatherings, but when it did, everybody listened. Sabrina. Look at me. It was my grandfather Alistair. He was 82 years old, a retired structural engineer with a mind as sharp as broken glass. He had been sitting near the center of the table all night, eating his food quietly, observing the entire spectacle with deep, calculating eyes. He slowly reached up and removed his reading glasses, setting them down next to his water glass. Sabrina looked over at him, her eyes wide and terrified. "Grandpa, I can explain. It is just a bank error. Do not insult my intelligence by lying to my face," Alistair interrupted, his voice steady and commanding. He reached into the inner pocket of his tweed suit jacket and pulled out his smartphone. He unlocked it and placed it flat on the table, pushing it slightly toward the center so the people sitting next to him could see the screen. "Before anyone in this room asks Margot to come back to this table or asks her for another favor," Alistair said, looking around the room, "I think Sabrina needs to explain exactly why she collected money from several of us to pay for a dinner that she never intended to fund in the first place." Sabrina froze. All the remaining color in her face vanished. I stood by the doorway, my heart skipping a beat. I knew she had stolen the credit for the dinner. I knew she had lied about being the host. But I had no idea she had actually taken money from people. Alistair tapped the screen of his phone. Let me read this aloud for those who cannot see it. This is a message from the group chat Sabrina created. Quote, "Gui fan dong gop qua moi nuoi cho chao truok Thursday sao. Chao baotron goi and hung moi nuoi fu chudit ne. Send me your share by Friday. I am covering the main package, but every little bit helps." Alistair looked up from his phone, his gaze locking onto Sabrina like a laser. Right beneath that message is my transfer receipt. "I sent you $500, Sabrina, because I believed you were trying to do something nice for your mother." Aunt Hazel gasped loudly. She grabbed her oversized purse, yanked out her own phone, and began scrolling frantically. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice rising in panic. "I sent her $800. She told me the wine package alone was draining her business accounts." My cousin Wyatt, sitting near the middle of the table, held up his phone, his face turning red with anger. "I sent $300. She messaged me privately and said the restaurant was demanding extra tips for the staff." Within 60 seconds, the math was done out loud. Between Alistair, Aunt Hazel, Wyatt, and 2 other cousins, Sabrina had secretly collected $4,000 in cash transfers from our relatives. She had pocketed $4,000 for a dinner she knew my credit card was actively paying for. Every single pair of eyes in the room turned away from me and locked onto Sabrina. The room was no longer looking at the scapegoat, they were staring at a thief. Sabrina panicked. Her hands fluttered wildly in the air as she tried to build a new lie on top of the old ones. No, you guys are misunderstanding. That money was for the extras. It was for the floral arrangements, the photographer, the transportation for Mom and Dad, things Margot was too cheap to cover." Declan, who had been standing silently near the table, cleared his throat. He did not like being used as a prop in a lie. He stepped forward, holding his tablet up. If I may clarify, Declan said, his voice ringing out clearly. The floral arrangements were included in the original package paid for by the initial deposit. The mandatory gratuity for the staff is already factored into the final bill you see on the table. And as for the transportation, the luxury car service that brought the birthday guests here tonight was booked and prepaid directly by Margot 3 weeks ago. Aunt Hazel glared at Sabrina, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. So where's my $800, Sabrina? Where did it go? Sabrina's answers collided with each other in a desperate, pathetic mess. First, she claimed the money was sitting safely in a separate savings account. Then, in the very next breath, she claimed she had spent it on a surprise luxury vacation for our parents that she had not booked yet. Then she tried to blame the banking app for double charging people. It was pathetic to watch. Alistair raised one hand, and the frantic questions from the relatives stopped immediately. There is nothing left to misunderstand, Alistair said, his voice laced with profound disappointment. You allowed this entire family to believe you financed this evening. You insulted the sister who was actually paying for everything, you tried to humiliate her, and you stole money from your own family members on top of it to fund your lifestyle. Sabrina turned toward me, standing by the door. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a wild, feral desperation. Margot set this up. She knew exactly how this would look. She planned this to ruin my reputation. I almost admired the sheer speed with which she tried to turn her own crimes into my conspiracy. But before I could even respond, Declan delivered the final, fatal blow. There is one last matter regarding the event planning, Declan said, scrolling on his tablet. He opened an email thread. We received specific instructions from Sabrina regarding the event photography and the cake presentation. Declan read the email aloud to the silent room. He detailed how Sabrina had explicitly instructed the photographer to avoid taking pictures of me. He then read the final request. Sabrina had asked the kitchen to scrape off the original icing on the cake that read "Happy Birthday" from Margot and Sabrina and replace it with "Love from Sabrina and family." Her final note in the email, Declan read, his voice steady, stated that Margot prefers to stay out of the spotlight and does not wish to be acknowledged. My mother put her hands over her face and let out a broken, miserable sob. The truth was finally out, bare and undeniable, shining under the crystal chandeliers for everyone to see. The aftermath in the dining room was swift and brutal. Sabrina had nowhere left to hide. The grand illusion of her success had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a mountain of debt and a room full of angry relatives demanding their money back. My father, realizing there was no way to sweep this under the rug, took charge. His face was grim, devoid of the usual soft indulgence he showed his eldest daughter. He walked over to Sabrina, who was sitting in her chair, staring blankly at the tablecloth. "Open your banking app, Sabrina," my father ordered, his voice hard. "Right now." With shaking hands, Sabrina unlocked her phone. Under the watchful, furious eyes of Aunt Hazel and Wyatt, she was forced to transfer every single dollar back to the relatives she had scammed. We all watched as the balance in her checking account dropped lower and lower, finally hitting a miserable, double-digit number. She was entirely tapped out. "Now," my father said, turning to Declan. "How much is the remaining balance on the venue?" $11,700, Declan replied. My father pulled out his own credit card and handed it to Declan. He then turned back to Sabrina, pulling a pen from his suit pocket and grabbing a blank piece of paper from the waiter's station. "I am paying this bill tonight, so we do not get arrested," my father said to her, his tone leaving no room for argument. "But you are going to sign a promissory note right now. I will be deducting $500 from your bank account every single month until this $11,700 is repaid in full. If you miss a single payment, I will let the restaurant's legal team come after you. Do you understand me?" Sabrina burst into tears. Real, ugly tears of defeat. She signed the paper with a trembling hand, her white dress looking ridiculous and tragic against the backdrop of her ruin. The party was officially over. There was no cake cutting. There were no toasts. People quietly gathered their coats and left, offering awkward, hushed apologies to my mother on their way out. I did not stay to watch them leave. I walked out of the hotel, hailed a cab, and went home to my apartment. I slept better that night than I had in a decade. The next morning, the desperation drove Sabrina straight to my office. It was a Tuesday. I was sitting at my drafting table, reviewing a landscaping layout, when the receptionist buzzed my phone. "Margot, your sister is here in the lobby. She does not have an appointment, but she is insisting it is an emergency." I sighed, setting my pen down. "Send her back." Sabrina walked into my office a moment later. The glamorous woman from the night before was completely gone. She looked exhausted. She was wearing oversized sunglasses to hide her puffy eyes, and she clutched a crumpled envelope in her hand. She closed my office door behind her and marched up to my desk. She threw the envelope onto my blueprints. "There," she said, her voice tight and defensive. "Open it." I picked up the envelope and slid my finger under the flap. Inside was a cashier's check made out to me for $2,500. It was the exact amount of the non-refundable deposit I had lost the night before. "Now we are even," Sabrina said, crossing her arms over her chest. "I've found some emergency funds. So, you can tell Grandpa and Aunt Hazel to back off. Tell them we made up. Tell them to stop texting me calling me a thief." I looked at the check, then looked up at her hidden eyes. "We are not even, Sabrina. Money is the absolute easiest part of this entire situation." She pulled her sunglasses down, revealing eyes that were red and furious. She was not sorry. She was just angry that she had been caught. "What else do you want from me, Margot? Do you want me to bleed? Do you want a public execution? My interior design business is bankrupt. I am being sued by a client. I am moving out of my apartment next week because I cannot afford rent. I have nothing left. Is that enough for you?" I did not feel a single ounce of pity. "I want a public correction," I said evenly, leaning back in my chair. "I want you to go into the family group chat. I want you to tell everyone that I planned and funded the dinner. I want you to admit that you lied about being the host and admit that you tried to have me excluded from the photos. I want you to stop using my money and my reputation to protect your own." Sabrina stared at me as though I had just asked her to cut off her right arm. "You want me to destroy whatever is left of my reputation in front of the whole family?" "No," I replied smoothly. "You already destroyed your reputation when your cards declined and Grandpa read your texts. I just want you to stop pretending I am the villain for holding the mirror up." Sabrina gritted her teeth, her hands balling into tight fists. "Mom will never forgive you for ruining her birthday. You know that, right? She is devastated." That was the exact moment I truly understood her motive for coming here. She had not come to apologize. She had come to restore the old, toxic arrangement. She wanted to offer me a token sum of money so that I would accept the blame for the conflict, smooth things over with the relatives, and allow everyone to move on without anyone actually having to change their behavior. She wanted the scapegoat to go back to grazing quietly in the corner. I picked up the cashier's check, slid it carefully back into the envelope, and stood up. I walked around my desk and placed the envelope directly into her trembling hand. "Keep the money, Sabrina. Use it to pay your rent," I said quietly. "But the silence is over. If Mom chooses to be devastated by the truth rather than devastated by your lies, then that is her choice to make. I am done managing everyone's feelings." Sabrina stood there for a long moment, realizing that her usual tactics were completely useless. The invisible sister was gone. She turned around and walked out of my office without saying another word. 2 days after Sabrina showed up at my office, I received a text from my mother. It was brief and formal. She asked me to come to my parents' house on Saturday afternoon for a family meeting. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I agreed to go, but under one strict condition: nobody was allowed to ask me to apologize for leaving the dinner. If anyone uttered the words, "You should have been the bigger person," I would walk out the front door immediately. My mother agreed. When I arrived at my childhood home on Saturday, the atmosphere was incredibly heavy. It felt like walking into a courtroom waiting for a verdict. My father was sitting on the living room sofa, looking like he had aged 10 years in a single week. The stress of paying off Sabrina's massive restaurant bill had clearly taken a toll on him. Sabrina sat in a separate armchair, staring intensely at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. The biggest surprise was sitting in the recliner by the window. Grandfather Alistair was there. He had a thick manila folder resting on his lap. I took a seat on the love seat across from my parents. My mother cleared her throat, nervously twisting her wedding ring. She began with the predictable, tired speech she had used my entire life. She talked about sisterhood, about how families have misunderstandings, and how one painful night should not erase a lifetime of love and connection. I listened patiently until she finally reached her intended point. "Margot," my mother said softly, her eyes pleading with me. "We know Sabrina made some terrible choices regarding the money." "We do. But you could have handled it privately. Standing up and leaving her with that bill in front of everyone, it was so harsh." Family protects family. I felt my blood pressure rise, but before I could respond, Grandfather Alistair opened his manila folder. The loud sound of the paper unsticking echoed in the quiet room. "Nadine," Alistair said, addressing my mother with a stern, authoritative tone. "You need to stop asking Margot to protect a system that is designed to abuse her. Privacy did not solve the problem in this family. Privacy protected the problem." Alistair pulled a thick stack of printed papers from the folder and tossed them onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. There were at least 20 pages. After the dinner, I asked several family members to send me screenshots of their past conversations with Sabrina, Alistair explained, looking at my sister. "I wanted to see if Tuesday night was a moment of panic or a pattern of behavior." He pointed to the top page. "This is a Facebook post from Margot's college graduation. Sabrina told everyone she paid Margot's tuition. A complete lie." He flipped to the next page. "These are text messages from a family holiday trip 2 years ago. Sabrina claimed Margot canceled at the last minute because she was being flaky. In reality, Wyatt sent me proof that Sabrina intentionally gave Margot the wrong departure date so she would miss the flight, just so Sabrina could take the larger bedroom at the rental house." My mother's face went pale as Alistair flipped through page after page. The graduation, the birthdays, the stolen credits, the constant, subtle sabotage. The pattern was undeniable. This was no longer just one messy dinner that my mother could dismiss as a misunderstanding. It was a 10-year history of calculated emotional abuse, designed to elevate Sabrina by tearing me down. "I knew about some of this," my father admitted suddenly, his voice cracking. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Not the money stealing. But I knew she treated you differently, Margot. I saw it. I stayed quiet because every time I tried to correct Sabrina, she threw a massive tantrum, and your mother defended her. It was just exhausting. It was easier to let you take the hit because you never complained." I looked at my father, feeling a deep, hollow sadness. "Your silence was a decision, Dad. It just made Sabrina's life easier and my life incredibly hard." He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. My mother began to cry, covering her face with her hands. For the first time in my life, I did not move from my seat to comfort her. That was another role I had performed automatically, and I was retiring from it. "So, what happens now?" Sabrina asked, her voice cracking. She looked terrified. Her throne had been dismantled piece by piece. "I will tell you what happens now," my father said, finding his backbone. "You will repay the money you owe me. You will go to therapy. And until you can prove that you have fundamentally changed, you are stripped of all family privileges. You will not organize family events. You will not handle group gifts. You will not speak on behalf of this family in any capacity." Losing that role, the role of the generous organizer, the center of attention, hurt Sabrina more than the declined credit cards. She looked at our mother, waiting for her to intervene and soften the punishment. My mother lowered her hands. She looked at the 20 pages of lies on the coffee table, then looked at Sabrina. "Your father is right," my mother whispered, her voice trembling. "We are done pretending." Sabrina looked at me, a silent, desperate plea in her eyes. She wanted me to fix it. She wanted the old Margot to step in and say the punishment was too harsh. I did not say a word. I realized then that true revenge was not the moment her card failed at the restaurant. True revenge was the moment the family finally stopped asking me to protect her from the truth. 6 months passed. The fallout from the birthday dinner fundamentally changed the landscape of our family. Sabrina did not handle the transition gracefully at first. She posted vague, passive-aggressive quotes on social media about toxic people and forgiveness, hoping to garner sympathy from extended relatives. But grandfather Alistair had already made sure the truth was known. Nobody took her bait. The flying monkeys were grounded. Eventually, facing total isolation, Sabrina deleted the posts and went quiet. She moved into a much smaller apartment, started working a regular retail job to pay off her debts to my father, and reportedly began seeing a therapist twice a week. My mother and father started going to couples counseling to figure out how they had allowed their parenting to become so twisted. We slowly began to rebuild, setting firm, non-negotiable boundaries. Then, I received an invitation for a family dinner. It was my parents' wedding anniversary. My first instinct was to politely decline. I was still fiercely protective of my peace. But then my mother sent me a follow-up message. She included a screenshot of the restaurant reservation confirmation and a photo of the prepaid receipt. "You do not need to organize anything, pay for anything, or worry about anything," her text read. "It is just a quiet dinner. You only need to decide whether you want to come. We would love to see you, but we respect your choice." That distinction mattered to me. It was an invitation, not an obligation. I accepted. When I arrived at the restaurant, a modest, quiet Italian place in the suburbs, the dynamic was entirely different. There were no professional photographers. There were no customized sculptures. It was intentionally ordinary. Sabrina was already seated when I walked in. She looked different. The flashy, arrogant aura was gone, replaced by a quiet, almost nervous energy. She wore a simple sweater and jeans. She had not tried to rearrange the seating chart. She had not tried to dictate the menu. Grandfather Alistair sat at the head of the table, sipping a glass of red wine, watching the scene with the faint, satisfied smile of a man who knew that real progress was less visually impressive than a performance, but vastly more valuable. Sabrina greeted me politely. She did not attempt a dramatic, tearful apology in front of everyone. Over the previous months, she had repaid Aunt Hazel and Wyatt in full, and she was steadily paying down her massive debt to our father. I knew these things because my father occasionally mentioned them, not because Sabrina used them to bargain for my immediate forgiveness. That difference mattered, too. During the main course, a large serving dish of garlic bread was placed directly between Sabrina and me. For one suspended, incredibly tense second, the memory flashed in my mind. I remembered her manicured finger tapping the polished oak table. I remembered her cruel voice telling me not to box the leftovers because I had not paid a single dollar. Sabrina remembered it as well. I saw her hand twitch. She looked at the bread, then looked up at me. She reached out, picked up the heavy serving dish, and moved it gently toward me. "You first, Margot," she said softly. It was a very small gesture. I did not mistake it for a magical transformation or instant healing, but I recognized it for what it was, a genuine concession of respect. I nodded, took a piece of bread, and filled my plate without a single ounce of apology. Later that evening, before dessert arrived, my mother stood up to make a brief toast. She thanked my father for 35 years of marriage. She thanked Alistair for always keeping the family grounded. And then, she looked directly at me. For a very long time, I used to praise Margot for being so strong and independent, my mother said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. But what I really meant was that I expected her to survive without any support from me. I used her competence as an excuse to give her less love and less protection. I was profoundly wrong. Margot, your generosity was never an obligation, and your boundaries are not a punishment. Thank you for forcing us to wake up. The room remained quiet, but this silence did not erase me. It made space for the truth. My mother did not ask me to cry, or to run over and hug her, or to tell her everything was magically fixed. She simply raised her water glass to me, drank, and sat back down. That restraint, that respect for my space, was the best apology she could have ever given me. After dinner, as we were all putting on our coats near the entrance, Sabrina found me standing alone near the doorway. I know we are not fixed, Sabrina said quietly, zipping up her jacket. I know I spent years trying to make you look small because I was terrified of feeling small myself. I know understanding my reasons does not magically remove the damage I caused you. You're right, I said, looking at her. It doesn't. I know, she nodded, accepting it without arguing. I am going to keep doing the work anyway. I believed she meant it in that moment. I also knew that belief did not require me to offer her immediate trust. Trust would take years to rebuild, if it ever was. We walked out to the parking lot separately. The family never returned to the old, toxic version of normal. Sabrina was no longer treated as the automatic, infallible leader. My father no longer disappeared into the background when conversations became uncomfortable. My mother checked the facts before blindly defending anyone. And me? I stopped funding celebrations to earn affection. I stopped accepting cruel jokes that were disguised as teasing. I stopped explaining my boundaries to people who were committed to misunderstanding them. Some of the extended relatives called me colder. Grandfather Alistair called me clearer. He was right. Clarity did not make me cruel. It simply ended the long tradition of treating my pain as the acceptable price of everyone else's comfort. The night Sabrina told me not to eat the food because I had not contributed a penny, she fully expected me to quietly defend the cost of my plate. Instead, I stopped paying for the entire illusion. The bill exposed her lies, but the real consequence was much larger. She lost the silent protection that had allowed her toxicity to thrive. I did not get revenge by ruining her life. I got revenge by refusing to let her build her life on my silence anymore. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, will be earned slowly and privately. But respect came first. So, let me ask you, the jury of the internet. If someone in your own family took credit for your hard work, humiliated you in public to boost their own ego, and expected you to just keep paying for the privilege of being abused, would you ever forgive them once they finally apologized and hit rock bottom? Or would you make them prove they had changed for years before ever letting them back into your inner circle? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this journey and want to hear more crazy family drama, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. See you in the next one.